Ladies and gentlemen, so the second Siege collab event has come to an end. And with it, the rerun of the first collab event has also started. Along with the first collaboration event banner, featuring Ash, Blitz and Frost. So, considering the first collab event was 3 years ago, I'm sure this rerun event and banner will be the first experience for so many people. But is this banner really worth it to pull right now? Well, first, let's take a look a bit at what the operators can do. First we have Ash as the 6th star. One of the most popular attacker operators in Siege. And in Arknights, she is a marksman sniper. Focusing on DPS and can do a bit of crowd control thanks to her talent 1 stun. And thanks to her talent 2, she can have a very cheap cost, especially if you unlock and upgrade her Y module. And this talent also gives her a big initial SP. But here's the catch. None of her skills have any initial SP. And this talent only works for the first deployment. Which I think is a pretty weird move from Hypergriff, even back then. Especially considering you are kinda forced to redeploy her if you use her S3. Now let's see her skills. Skill 1 is a decent infinite duration skill. That increases her attack a bit, and attacks 2 hits in a row. A pretty nice skill to use, especially if you have an attack buffer like Skalter. But overall I don't think it's a skill you should focus on. Meanwhile, skill 2 is considered her best skill to use. It will instantly stun enemies via talent 1. She goes full auto, and also deals critical damage to enemies who are stunned. Thanks to this, Ash can deal with slightly armored enemies, even at Elite 1. Something that other marksmen often struggles with. And clear squishy targets even quicker. But because the damage multiplier only activates to stun targets, you can already tell it's going to be useless against someone that's immune to stun. But to be fair, it is mostly on bosses, and as far as I'm concerned, Ash isn't really a boss killer unit after chapter 5. And lastly, we have her skill 3. Ash will use her breaching round. That can push enemies with a significant force, dealing critical damage when it hits enemies and when it explodes. And it will deal even bigger damage if the breaching round knocks enemies, and then hit a ranged tiles. Well, this skill can deal pretty high burst damage to handle armored targets, and clear crowds. The damage multiplier also makes it a good skill to be buffed. But since she can only use it twice per deployment, because lore accuracy stuff and all, it makes this skill usage very limiting. And honestly, compared to other burst damage sources we have nowadays, this skill clearly has fall off. Okay, that's the 6th star. But what about the 5-star operators? Well, for a 5-star standard, Blitz and Frost are considered good, especially Blitz. Blitz is a sentry defender, and one of the rare cases where a non-6 star has 2 talents. His first talent will allow him to deal critical damage to stunned enemies. And neatly enough, this talent also makes him prioritize stunned targets. And his talent 2 will give him permanent ability to resist an attack, as long as there's a wall beside or behind him. For skills, skill 1 will make him use the flash charges on his shield. That will temporarily stun and silence enemies in range. You can use this multiple times in a short interval thanks to the cheap cost. But you can only use it 4 times per deployment. And in his skill 2, Blitz will bash his shield to all enemies that are blocked by him, dealing a pretty good damage and then stuns them. Afterwards, he will get attack speed boost and multiplying his talent 1 effect. Overall a good damage dealer and stun utility skill. And also don't forget, his archetype got a module in the previous event that let him reveal invisible enemies within his range, giving you more reason to bring him into a stage. Alright, the last gacha character is Frost. Frost is a trap master specialist, and a traditional one unlike her fellow co-worker Ella. So her drawbacks mostly came from her archetype typical drawbacks. like how her traps can't be placed if it's occupied by enemies. And she required more careful planning and active play. That I assume is AFK enjoy a public enemy number 1. Anyway, let's talk about her talent. Well, there's nothing much to talk about to begin with. Because her talent just dictates how many traps she can deploy and carry. Although if you have her module upgraded, she and her traps will start ignoring some defense. Now let's see her skills. Her traps will give different effects depending on what skill she uses. Like in skill 1, aside from dealing physical damage, her traps will also stun the enemy. But the active effect is just the typical trap master skill that lets her gain new traps. As for skill 2, now her traps will bind the enemy instead. But if a trap is triggered within her range, she will use her shotgun to deal 3 additional damage to that enemy. So ladies and gentlemen, should you pull this collab banner? Honestly, I think you should skip this, especially if your target is Ashe. Gameplay wise, for this day and age, I think Ashe doesn't cut it anymore as a 6-star unit. She's still a decent marksman to clear out mobs, particularly flying enemies with her S2. But not a 6-star I would recommend you to empty your resources with. Especially compared to the 6-star snipers we already have after her. And I'm sure most of you already know, we will have another very strong limited 6-star sniper soon. And other great ops after that. And well, if you got Ella, she's pretty much an upgraded version of Ashe. As for the 5 stars, like I said, they are pretty much considered good for a 5-star standard, especially Blitz. But you certainly can find an alternative to what they offer. Particularly if you have Ella from her recent banner. I think she could replace Frost as a trap master in your team. But as always, super limited characters' selling point is the fact that they are most likely won't be back into the game. If you don't want to miss out on limited items, this is your only chance to get them. We do not know whether they will get a rerun again or not. And well, if you did get them, there's another perk if you have Ashe and other first collab operators. And that is they can turn the control center into a 5th dorm. That should be all. Adios.